All right, welcome everybody. It's wonderful to see you all. For those who don't know me, my screen name shows as the Sydney Passengers. I'm Bill Barnes, the captain. I've met you before, welcome. The last time our society met in person was on the 1st of March last year, when a group of us went to a play in Sydney. So it's almost 12 months ago, we hadn't had a meeting, so it's wonderful to be able to join us together on this virtual meeting. I hope the issues of the passengers log and our discussion on our Facebook group have been instrumental in keeping you connected to your fellow passengers. We've had, as I mentioned before, we had 19 registrations, but 10 or 12 people so far. I'd like to welcome our newest member from Sydney, Gabriella Platt, who's joining us today for the first time. Welcome, Gabriella. Aleš Kolodrubek from Czech Republic. It's very early in the morning for him. Thank you, Aleš, for joining us. And Yuchi Hariyama from Tokyo. Good to see you too, Yuchi.
Hi.
Great program lined up today. Erin O'Neill will be giving a presentation on the television Rivals of Sherlock Holmes, and we'll be happy to answer questions after that. We're also extremely fortunate in our guest today being Australian author Candice Fox, whose first book, Hades, won the 2014 Ned Kelly Award for Best First Novel. Not content with that, Candice followed up the next year. We took out the Ned Kelly Award 2015 for the Best Novel for her second book, Eden. She's done very well in other awards as well. Candice has written 7 books so far on her own and a further 5 books in conjunction with American author James Patterson. I think that numbers are right, but if not, Candice, please correct me when you come on. Candice will talk about the influence of Sherlock Holmes on modern crime fiction. After the meeting and presentations and associated questions and answers, we'll open up the meeting for informal chats, so please stick around for that. I'll now pass over to David Lewis, who will host the meeting.
Thank you again to everyone for joining us. For questions, I think if you raise your hand, you can do it virtually, or you can just raise your hand and I'll bring you in as best as priority of who got their hand up first as I can see. Because we're limited, you don't want to spend too much time listening to me, so I'm very happy now to introduce our first speaker. Erin O'Neill is the navigator of the Sydney Passengers, and it occurred to me this morning that I first met her at what was both of ours first meeting. That was some years back. Since we're both about 29, I'm guessing it couldn't be any more than about 5 years. I think Erin's a bit older than me, but we won't go into that. But without further ado, please welcome Erin O'Neill.
Hello, everyone. Yes, of course, that was only a few years ago, David. Right, my talk today is on the television Rivals of Sherlock Holmes. I'm going to just attempt to share my screen right now, and I should have desktop. There it is. And let me just share sound as well, otherwise I'll be in trouble. Somebody tell me you can see my screen.
Yes, ma'am.
All clear here.
Thanks, David. Okay, so whilst watching television and movies, I often notice Sherlockian references in non-home settings. Sometimes these are obvious, other times more obscure. For example, the dog that did nothing in the nighttime might potentially be the most frequently used quote in non-Holmes detective shows. It even gets a mentioned episode of Morse. When you eliminate the impossible line, and its many variations, must be a close runner-up, and there are a plethora of 2 bodies in the same coffin, a la Lady Frances Carfax. Some programs borrow Sherlockian traits for their characters. Yeah. Some use Sherlock Holmes as a jumping-off point for the plots, and some even borrow scenarios from the stories. Several years ago, I began to keep a list of such references, and I've periodically submitted my findings for the log. My list is nowhere near complete. I don't actively seek these out. I just rely on my own viewing habits, and I've received helpful hints from other passengers from time to time. When I first started to compile this list for the log, I established some rules aimed at keeping it to a reasonable length. The TV program or film must not be directly about Holmes. It can't be a pastiche or a film parody. The reference has to be significant. So, So Sherlock or Elementary is not enough to count. Tenuous or contrived connections must be treated skeptically. So in other words, there has to be a clear connection to Holmes. In the case of detective and police programs and films, it needs to be pretty directly related to the canon. TV detectives are allowed some latitude to make deductions without being accused of being Sherlockian derivatives. And lastly, and most importantly, I reserve the right to ignore these rules when it suits me. I'm only going to highlight a few of the more interesting references I found for this talk. There are a number I've skipped over as either being too brief or I can't fit them in due to time constraints. There are also more where I couldn't find a nice image or a video clip. They're all in my log articles, though, if you want to go back through those. On this slide, you can see a few of the ones that actually got away from me. So getting into the more detailed references, Star Trek is indisputably the world's most famous television science fiction series. I don't think it's probably necessary for me to explain the premise. It's safe to say that everybody probably knows of Star Trek, even if they've never watched it. Star Trek The Next Generation was the first of the spin-offs. In the episode Elementary Dear Data, the android Data is on the holodeck, which, for the uninitiated, is a place where they can conjure up any scenario and actively participate in it. He's acting out a Sherlock Holmes mystery, but because Data is essentially a computer, he can work out all the outcomes too easily. His Watson, Geordie LaForge, therefore sets the holodeck computer the challenge of coming up with the Sherlock Holmes mystery that Data won't be able to solve. The result is that a Moriarty is created that is aware of what he is, a hologram, and is able to take control of the holodeck computer. Moriarty kidnaps the ship's medical officer, Dr. Pulaski, and demands to be allowed off the holodeck. Captain Picard convinces him the technology to do this does not exist, and all is resolved. Moriarty returns, however, in a later episode called Ship in a Bottle. This episode is a bit too complicated to summarize in a few sentences, but basically it transpires that the holodeck Moriarty is really alive and claims to have been imprisoned on the holodeck for the past 4 years. He then takes control of the ship, but it then emerges that they are all involved in an elaborate holodeck fantasy. The crew eventually manage to trick Moriarty into relinquishing control of the ship, and he in turn is trapped in a small cube living out a continuing hollow fantasy. The other Star Trek reference I wanted to make, at the risk of breaking my own rule in relation to insubstantial references, but I feel it must be mentioned that Mr. Spock is prone to quoting a particularly famous Holmes line. This occurs first in Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, from Leonard Nimoy's Spock, and is later echoed in the 2009 Star Trek reboot with Zachary Quinto.
An ancestor of mine maintained that if you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
To eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
Moving on, Due South. For those who aren't familiar with this quirky Canadian comedy drama series, it's about a Mountie, Constable Benton Fraser, who goes to Chicago on the trail of the killers of his father and ends up fighting crime in the city with Chicago detective Ray Vecchio, played by 2 different actors in the course of the series. They're aided by Fraser's deaf Arctic wolf, Diefenbaker, and the ghost of Fraser's father, something that's too hard to explain in the context of this talk. Due South has some very good genes. Its creator, Paul Haggis, later won an Oscar and a BAFTA as writer-director of Crash, and the first season's story editor, David Shaw, went on to create the equally quirky House, of which more later. I probably could do a whole talk on the Sherlockian references in Due South on its own, but I'll try and keep this as short as possible. Most significantly, Fraser's street address for the first 2 seasons was number 221 West Racine. Benton Fraser has some distinctly Sherlockian aspects to his character. He'll crawl along the road, sniff things, and often taste them, much to the disgust of his partner, and examine them closely in the search for clues. For example, in the episode Victoria's Secret, Fraser identifies a cigarette butt as Canadian by sniffing it. He also does a good line in deductive reasoning. In Letting Go, he gives a lengthy explanation of how he deduced the profession of a physiotherapist from the shape of her hands, musculature, and scent. Although people who know the series will recall that he does this to cover the fact he'd been watching her conduct a fitness class through the hospital window. In Diefenbaker's Day Off, he deduces his dinner companion is a journalist by noticing the way she holds her wrists, indicating the use of a keyboard, a crick in her neck from high phone usage, and ink under her nails. His observation skills are well up to Sherlockian standards. In The Edge, Fraser and his father determine a man's height and weight by looking at his footprints in the snow. And in the pilot episode, he points out to Detective Vecchio that the person the detective thinks is a garment seller cannot be, because a garment seller is unlikely to have a hole in his shoe. In the episode Chinatown, Fraser identifies a location by the analysis of a handful of earth, a la Holmes deducing Watson's trip to Wigmore Street Post Office in The Sign of 4. In Gift of the Wheelman, he even does a variation on the theme of when you eliminate the impossible, though not quite in so many words, and ending with, if it's the only logical solution, it doesn't have to make sense. Moving on. House. This is the long-running medical drama about acerbic and irreverent Dr. Gregory House, ably performed by Hugh Laurie, playing what was, at the time, against type. House is head of diagnostic medicine at the fictional Princeton Plainsboro Teaching Hospital. The program was created by David Shaw, who I just mentioned as a story editor on Due South. There's actually a webpage devoted to House Holmes connection, which was how I found out that Shaw was actually inspired by Holmes when creating House. The most obvious reference are the names. The similarity of House to Holmes is obvious. And there's also his only friend, James Wilson, so the same initials as John Watson. The other obvious Sherlockian link is revealed in the episode Hunting, when it emerges that House lives at number 221B. So if the audience hadn't noticed that the way House uses his patient's symptoms like clues and eliminates them all until the however improbable one turns out to be the truth, that should certainly hit them over the head with the obvious link. House is also bored by more mundane cases until handed something unusual that piques his curiosity. Then there is House's drug use, Vicodin for the pain in his leg as opposed to Holmes's cocaine use. The episode Who's Your Daddy begins with House about to inject himself with morphine, then stopping when an interesting case presents itself. This does more than slightly resemble the image of Holmes described in The Sign of 4 as needing cocaine to ward off boredom of not having a case to occupy his mind. House is also musical, often seen playing the piano at the end of the episode, much like Holmes's use of the violin. No clips for that one. Doctor Who. As with Star Trek, I probably don't need to explain Doctor Who, but in brief, this science fiction series is about the Doctor, a scientist from the planet Gallifrey who can travel through space and time, along with his usually human companions. In the episode The Talons of Weng Chiang, the Doctor, at the time played by Tom Baker, literally dons a deerstalker to solve a mystery in Victorian England involving giant rats patrolling the sewers. The costuming isn't the only Sherlockian reference. There's also a housekeeper called Mrs. Hudson, a line elementary My Dear Lightfoot, and of course the marginally more subtle Giant Rat of Sumatra connection. According to the BBC Doctor Who site, there are also references to A Study in Scarlet, The Man with the Twisted Lip, and the Abbey Grange. It's been quite a while since I saw this series of episodes in full, so I can't actually identify exactly where those ones are. Shanghai Knights is the 2003 film sequel to comedy western Shanghai Noon. The year is 1887, when the father of Shong Wang, played by Jackie Chan, is murdered for the Chinese imperial seal of which he is keeper. Chon and Offsider Roy O'Bannon, Owen Wilson, travel to London to avenge the death and retrieve the imperial seal. Sherlockian references abound. The villain of the piece is one Lord Rathbone. The slightly bumbling Scotland Yard detective the pair meet is one Artie Doyle, who displays his powers of deduction to describe Roy in an early scene. Roy gives his name as Sherlock Holmes when trying to bluff his way into a state occasion, having chosen it from a sign on a clock that says Sherlock Watchmakers, Holmes County, Ireland. Later, Roy appears in typical Holmes silhouette in the window of a door, as you can see in the picture there. When it's opened, he's indeed dressed in deerstalker and Inverness. There follows a scene at which Artie Doyle deduces the location of a boy called Charlie Chaplin, who has possession of the seal, by examining Charlie's hat with a magnifying glass. At the end of the film, Artie announces his intention to write crime fiction and asks Roy if he can use the name Sherlock Holmes. Roy allows this, subsequently confiding to Chon that he thinks Sherlock Holmes is a terrible name for a detective. Now, quick section on animated comedies about dysfunctional families. In the Simpsons episode Treehouse of Horror 15 Halloween special, we're treated to a mini episode called 4 Beheadings and a Funeral. This features Lisa Simpson dressed in deerstalker and Inverness as Eliza Simpson, solving a crime with Bart Simpson as her easily amazed sidekick, Dr. Bartley. In addition to the Treehouse of Horror episode, the couch gag that ends every set of opening credits of The Simpsons features a Sherlockian one in season 23. The gag features Police Chief Wiggum as Sherlock Holmes and his Sergeant Lou as his Watson, while Homer Simpson lies murdered on the couch. Family Guy. Seth MacFarlane's animated comedy often creates its own special take on adaptations of other franchises. It has lampooned everything from Star Wars to the Road 2 movies. In the episode V is for Mystery, Talking Baby Stewie and Talking Dog Brian take on Sherlock Holmes with an episode-long story in which they try to solve a string of murders in Victorian London. Murdoch Mysteries. This Canadian series is set in turn-of-the-century Toronto and features Detective William Murdoch, who serves with the Toronto Police Force. Murdoch is also something of an inventor, coming up with various, usually anachronistic aids to his detective work that are far ahead of their time. Famous people drop into the police station with alarming regularity, including Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, played by Geraint Wyn Davies, who appears in 3 episodes: Elementary, My Dear Murdoch, Belly Speaker from season 1, and A Study in Sherlock from season 6. In Elementary, My Dear Murdoch, Doyle is in Toronto to investigate spiritualism and takes title character Murdoch with him to a seance during which a young woman speaks through a medium to say she has been murdered and is buried in a shallow grave. Doyle and Murdoch investigate together, and Murdoch proves the medium's message was a fraud. Murdoch's superior, Thomas Brackenreid, also suggests to Doyle that he should write a new Sherlock Holmes story called Hellhound of the Highlands. Doyle returns to Toronto in Belly Speaker with the excuse he is doing research for a story he plans to write based on Murdoch. He subsequently reveals he is looking for a practitioner of Chinese medicine to try and find a cure for his wife's consumption. While there, Doyle teams up again with Murdoch to investigate murder. A Study in Sherlock sees Doyle summoned to Toronto in 1900 in order to assist Murdoch's police station with David Kingsley, a man who believes he is Sherlock Holmes. The fraudulent Holmes ends up assisting Murdoch in a case, and Doyle returns to England with plans to write a new Holmes story. Okay. In an early episode of The Muppet Show, there is a sketch called Sherlock Holmes and the Case of the Disappearing Clues, in which Ralph the dog stars as Sherlock Holmes, with Afghan hound Baskerville, an appropriate name, as Watson. The disappearing clues in the title are caused by a purple monster eating the evidence, and also Watson. There are many, many more references that I've skipped here, so just consider this a taster for your own researchers, and thank you for your time. Let me unshare.
Thank you very much, Erin.
Thank you.
Virtual round of applause, I think. We're all muted, I think. Now, if there are any questions, please raise your hand, and we'll unmute you to ask. No?
It's
no
perfect.
question?
No questions.
Oh, good.
A comprehensive paper. Can I suggest that we not log off but take a couple of minute break while we get Candice in, our next speaker? Or is there before we do that, is there anything anyone would like to tell us about while we move on to our next section? Any announcements? Or yeah, Lee. Hi, Lee.
Hi. I brought along just some little books to show for the usual show and tell.
Excellent.
I don't know if you can see them. It's a little set. People might know them. It's called the Otto Penzler Sherlock Holmes Library. They're all little paperbacks, which are reprints, originally done back in the 50s, I think. And I got them recently. They're quite good. There's one by Vincent Starrett, 221B, Studies in Sherlock Holmes. And there's 17 Steps to 221B, a Sherlockian collection by English writers. And yeah, a number of interesting ones there. So I just picked those up cheaply from eBay. They were worth recommending. The Otto Penzler set.
Thank you, Lee. Is it? Yeah, Bill.
We're showing books. I bought this from my young niece. This is the used to say Looney Tunes cartoon of Daffy Duck and Porky Pig as Holmes and Watson. So $5 at the post office, a bargain. Thank
Excellent.
you.
Oh.
Excellent. Is there anyone else? Okay, well, did we still want to take a quick refill our drinks, a 2-minute break, or do we want to keep going? I'll take that as we'll keep going. I'd like to welcome Candice Fox to our meeting. Candice is probably Australia's best-selling crime fiction author. If she's not, she's up there. Her work by herself is excellent. I thoroughly recommend all of it. I've been going through Crimson Lake again. I hadn't read it in a few years and had forgotten just how good it is. It is, according to her website, about to be filmed with I've forgotten his name, Thomas Jane, as the hero of the book, or the anti-hero of the book. She's also written with James Patterson. Probably, in fact, he is the biggest selling living crime author, and her series with him is also excellent, especially if you're a James Patterson fan. We're very pleased to have her here. She's also works in woodwork, knitting, and likes wine, according to her website, and she's also an amateur guitarist. So without further ado, I would like to pass on to Candice Fox.
Hello, hi everyone. Thanks so much for having me here. Can I just ask Dave, I talk for 20 minutes and then we have a bit of a question time. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, yeah, just double checking. Things are a bit mad in the house at the moment. My husband has taken over charge of my 18-month-old daughter, Violet. So if there's a crashing or banging in the background, you'll know. So I have a copy of Crimson Lake here, which I'm currently working on my 16th novel, and of my collection, this is probably the most heavily influenced by my readership of Sherlock Holmes, you know, the entire canon. So I thought I would just speak briefly about the character in this book and how that came about, and some of the ways in which I think deliberately at the time I was emulating Holmes and his relationship with Watson, and then, you know, retrospectively looking back, I've realized how I've been influenced. So in Crimson Lake, I'll give you a brief. This is actually the American cover. I've given away all of my Australian covers. So I have an American and a bunch of other covers here. The story it's through the eyes of Ted Conkaffey, who is an ex-police detective who is accused of a terrible crime. He is accused of, he was present at a bus stop almost exactly at the time that a young girl was abducted and sexually assaulted. So he is unable to prove his innocence, and his entire life is destroyed. And it's while he is in Cairns and he's hiding out from the entire world that he meets Amanda Pharrell. Amanda was very difficult to write, and that's not something that happens to me often. I know the characters and the people that I'm dealing with often a lot better than I do the plot. And so Ted comes in and meets her at a cafe, and I had to just keep playing that back, just having Ted come in and meet her, having Ted come in and meet her and have their discussions in the cafe. And she actually started off male, and I was going to have a Watson and Holmes type relationship with a male character, but I don't know if I was intimidated by just how that exists in fiction already and how well it's been done, or what happened, but it just wasn't working. And her appearance changed a whole bunch of times. She was very tall and then very short, and then, you know, she was just a almost bodiless figure for a long time. So Amanda employs a lot of, you know, the Holmes style deductions. She's very sharp-eyed and will take observations that she makes about people and blow them out into these huge conclusions. For example, I think it's book 3 that she realizes that one of the police officers working on the case of a missing boy is corrupt, simply because she looks at his watch and has this back knowledge how expensive that watch is and exactly what model of watch that is and how rare it is for her to get. You know, she suddenly becomes this enormous watch expert, and can tell that it's a brand new watch, and he's only acquired it within the last couple of weeks, and this is what this means for him being corrupt. Ted goes to her office. So she's a private, very casual private detective style person, goes to her office and finds, you know, a confronting kind of scene, such that Watson experiences, you know, chaotic, messy, not very logically organized. You know, and I always found that striking about Holmes is you would imagine that he is somebody who's so particular and fine. You know, Watson talks about him being cat-like, that he would be very neat, and it's one of the many contradictions that makes him such a wonderful character. You know, so Amanda is the same. She has 11 cats, but no affection for them whatsoever. So they have come into her life. She's kind of annoyed that they're here. You know, a cat came to her doorstep in the rain and then gave birth to a bunch of kittens, and now she has them all. And you know that logically she could get rid of them if she wants to, but you know, it just doesn't happen. And so that the interplay of Ted trying to get her to admit she likes these cats, but in fact her professing that she doesn't, makes for some amusing discussion. She seems cold and callous at times, but she is so driven towards getting justice for the people that she's working with, and that is very it's hard to write because it doesn't make a lot of sense, even to me. There was a scene, I believe it's in the second novel, where Amanda has some autopsy photographs of one of the victims, and she is sort of daydreaming while some other people are talking, and she's drawing a mustache on one of the autopsy photos. And this gesture was a point of discussion, much discussion from all of my editors. I have 6 editors, 2 Australian, 2 American, a German, and a UK editor. And so the UK editor began by saying, "I'm not sure about this. This is very cold and callous, her drawing this mustache on this picture." And the Germans came in and said, "Well, Amanda would say it's just a picture. Like, why should we pay respect to this picture of this person who's dead?" And then all of the discussion came through. And so, you know, that logically, it is just a picture that she is defacing. And if you asked her about it, she would say it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make logical sense to do this. And yet she is so impassioned about finding justice for these 2 young people who have been killed, that she often, you know, in the novel, she puts herself in physical peril, and she works out of hours, and she obsesses, and she, you know, Amanda blows off steam in very strange ways. She goes to bars and gets really stonkingly drunk, and wears very provocative clothing, and gets herself into a situation where she's surrounded by men and she's very, very vulnerable. And, you know, I don't take that to its conclusion. In the novel, Ted intervenes, and you think to yourself, what was the intention there, and what does she do? And it's a little bit like, you know, Watson worrying about Holmes and his drug use, and wanting to be there for him, and it's almost like a sibling worrying about their partner. And I think that the reaction to Amanda by my audiences has been very, very interesting. The two concerns that people have about her, they want to diagnose her with something. So they want to pin me down and have me say, this character has Asperger's, or this character is an autistic savant, or this character is a genius, or, you know, and I think just refreshing my mind with Holmes over the last couple of days in preparation for this, the academic attention paid to Sherlock Holmes, a lot of it is the same attention. Can we diagnose him with something? Can we put a box around him and explain his behavior and categorize it? And I understand that distinction, but it's just not what I want to do with that character. And the other bit of focus of attention that is paid to Amanda by audiences is trying to diagnose her sexuality. Has she had boyfriends? Is she a virgin? Is she a lesbian? Is she going to sleep with Ted? There's a huge desire for her not to sleep with Ted ever. And people have said to me, if they get together, I'll stop reading. And I think that trying to scrounge around for any kind of evidence of Sherlock Holmes's sexuality and what does this mean, and does he have a contempt for women, or, you know, and Irene Adler, would they ever get together, and that kind of thing. This is the same obsession that I see with Holmes. So I look back at that character and I think that unconsciously I was doing a lot of this stuff and emulating Holmes, and my editors were very aware of it. They were pointing and saying, this is a little bit Sherlock Holmes, isn't it? You know, not like it was a bad thing, but I suppose trying to make me aware of the territory that I was exploring, because if I became too much like Holmes with that character, you know, I was opening up the door, you know, and people were going to say, you're either trying to do it or you're not. Don't half try to do it, you know. And those attributes of hers. So, and some of it was conscious, because she was a very strange character and very hard to write. The reason she ended up being called Amanda, which is a kind of it's a more ordinary name than what I would choose usually, is I thought to myself, I want to channel someone who is completely misunderstood in society, and that's had terrible consequences for them. And so I started channeling Amanda Knox, because if you're familiar with the case of Amanda Knox, she was an American student who went to Italy, and her housemate was murdered, and her behavior after that murder got her in a lot of trouble. She was perceived by the police to not be emotional enough about that murder, and the same questions were being raised. Does she have Asperger's? Does she have some kind of social disorder? Why is she so cold and callous and her determination to clear her name since then obviously contradicts that. So yes, I'm kind of winding down of things that I can say about Amanda. I mean, it's something that happened in my writing career. You know, when you're 4 books in, or I think I was 5 books in at that time, you start looking back in your mind through all of the crime fiction greats that you have read, and you've sort of found your own voice, and you're trying to reach up as high as you can and start weaving in the greatness of other people. And I never actually read any, I never still have, don't tell anyone, I have not read any any of Edgar Allan Poe's Dupin, but definitely I Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes and Michael Connelly's Bosch, and of course Lee Child's Jack Reacher have had influences on me and my work. So yes. Am I too early to turn it over to questions? I feel like I'll have more to say if people start spurring me on. What do you think, Dave?
Yeah, if you're ready for questions, please let anyone who's got anything to ask. In fact, I might ask.
Go ahead.
Do you have a favourite Sherlock Holmes story that maybe influenced you most of all?
Oh, I taught the Hound of the Baskervilles. I had a brief foray into high school teaching while I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life before I was published. And so that was what my undergrad degree was in. So I taught the Hound of the Baskervilles, and I taught it again many years later when I was teaching at the University of Notre Dame. And I just think it's so atmospheric. It's the Hound has a kind of a haunting quality to it, and this is a haunting case for Holmes and Watson that I really like. I mean, my first 4 novels that were all rejected before I was ever accepted as an author, they were all vampires and werewolves and that kind of thing. So the idea of a hellish hound really appealed to me, and then you add in all of the crime fiction elements to it as well. And I just love the simplicity of looking at the footsteps and saying, the footsteps are far enough apart that this person was running, and you just go, well, of course. Of course, but it's only because I look at it that I go, oh yeah, this person was running through the snow. I think it's snow, and that's just beautiful. And it's not one of those clues that you have to have special forensic knowledge of. It's just an observation that pays. It plays such an important part in solving that crime. And so probably the Hound of the Baskervilles. I don't know if that's a boring answer or not in terms of Sherlock Holmes lore. I hope you're not going, oh my God, that's everybody's favorite,
There's a reason that it's everybody's favorite. It's a terrific book. There was no wrong answer, by the way.
Okay. There's one I remember, because I read them all when I was a teenager, and there was one where the killer is actually a boa constrictor. I don't know the name of it. It was like a yellow snake, and I remember, am I right about that? Am I recalling? Yeah. And I remember as a teenager being like, oh my God, I just did not see that coming. So whatever the name of that one is, that was a twist that just made me throw the book across the room in surprise. So probably close second.
Bragging rights for who can say the name of the story.
I assume it's Speckled Band.
I was going to say, is it Speckled Band? That makes sense.
That's the one I thought.
Also known as the story with the snake. Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. Obviously, you're well versed in the original Sherlock Holmes stories written by Conan Doyle, but do you also read pastiche and watch the movies and TV shows, or that come up?
I have watched the films and the Sherlock, the series with Lucy Liu, and I'm a modern, I'm a feminist, I'm not a Sherlock Holmes aficionado the way that everyone in here is, but there was a little part of me that kind of went, oh, a female Watson, what? And was shocked and appalled by the idea, just because it's so beloved to the relationship between the two men. But I think she did a really good job there. And I like Robert Downey Jr. Benedict Cumberbatch. I watched the Benedict Cumberbatch one, so I enjoyed them all. I don't know if that's a subject of controversy, if there's a bit of arguing about which is best and that kind of thing, but I like them all. Yeah.
Can I say something? Thank you, Candice. That's very interesting. When you're developing your characters in your story, do you use the characteristics, either behavioural or emotional, of people that you knew or you came across, or how do you get those nuances into a story?
It's interesting. Sometimes I can meet someone and they have a particular thing that they do that I like. I was out with a friend of mine, Tim Aliff, who is another crime writer, and he, you know, I've been out with this guy a bunch of times, and I only just noticed the other day that he has a tick that he does where he sort of boops the end of his nose and then pushes his glasses up, and just every now and then he goes boop, push. And I was explaining it to my husband. I was saying, you know, he does this thing where he goes boop, push. And I said, I love that. I don't know why, but I like that. And so I'll probably use that. So there are tiny little mannerisms like that. But there a lot of the characters there are shades of me in there, or shades of people that I would like to be, or I have dreamed of being and accepted that I will never be. For example, I'm not very tough at all. I'm just not a tough person. If someone speaks to me rudely, there's a good chance I'll burst into tears. That's my daughter. I don't know if you can hear that, my daughter bursting into tears almost as if on cue out there. And so a lot of these characters, you know, the character that James Patterson and I write together, Harriet Blue, she always knows exactly what to say, and she's a really good fighter, and she's just so cutting with the things that she just absolutely knocks people down. And I will never be like that because I'm so wimpy, and I get tongue-tied very, very easily. So it's a kind of a fantasy. It's a fantasy me. If that answers your question. It's a mix of everything I experience, and I have done things in my career to try to get inside the heads of people, you know, who are very vastly different to me. A couple of years ago, I went to San Quentin to visit a serial killer, Lawrence Bittaker. I was in the US, I was living in the US for a year, and I watched a documentary about him while I was there, and I thought, this is the worst living serial killer that I know of. What he did was so horrifying to me. Him and his partner would abduct young ladies and take them up into the mountains behind Los Angeles and do horrible, horrible things to them. And so I wrote to him and I said, I want to understand you as a person. You know, and I made it very clear, I'm not interested in you romantically, which it turns out many ladies are for some reason. And I said, I'm not going to humor you either. I'm not going to lie or humor or try to manipulate you. I'm there to ask you the hard questions. So if you will allow me to visit you, you know, could I please visit you? And I did. And I spoke to him over many, many hours, trying to get inside his brain. And of course, looking at his mannerisms, because one of the things that he would do is try to convince me that he is this wretched, misunderstood creature. And he could burst into tears on cue. And you know, looking at his hands and the way that he used them, and how much eye contact was he making, and some of the ways that he tried to explain or rationalize what he had done was terrifying. For example, you know, That's my daughter, sorry. He said to me, for 33 years in my life, I didn't hurt a fly. I had all these friends, law-abiding citizen, all this kind of stuff. And then, yes, you know, there was this 3-month period where I murdered 5 women. And he said, I was arrested. And since then, I've been in prison. I obey the laws in prison. I have many friends here. I wouldn't hurt a fly. He said, so if you look at my life as a whole, really, I've mostly been a very good person. And it's just this little chapter or phase that I am so unfairly judged upon. And I said, with all due respect, I'm not sure that's exactly how it works. You know, but in his mind, or he had rationalized it to say that, you know, your life is a pie graph, and if one of those slices is filled with torture and murder of innocent victims, well, at least it's not the whole thing, you know. So yes, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Candice. Lee Blackmore's had his hand up for a while, so hello,
Yeah,
Lee.
Candice, I was wanting to ask a question about your writing with James Patterson, if I could.
Yeah, sure.
Wondering how that came about and whether you first contacted him or whether, you know, perhaps one of your publishers or editors put you in touch. How did that come to be?
It was interesting. I knew that he was coming to town because I had been invited to a cocktail party that he was hosting to promote Private Sydney. He had already collaborated with 2 Australians and written Private Oz with Michael White and Private Sydney with Catherine Fox. And he was here to promote that. And I was having lunch with my publisher and I said, how does a person collaborate with James Patterson? And I was 3 books in at that time. And she said, don't get too big for your boots now. There's a whole list of people ahead of you for something like that. And I said, yeah, all right. And I kind of, you know, put it aside. But then at the cocktail party, I was determined to have my fan moment with James Patterson because I've been reading his stuff since I was a little kid. I grew up in quite a weird household. My mum had 6 kids and she fostered 155 kids as I was growing up. So I got away with reading a lot of material that I probably shouldn't have been reading. So I went up to him and I said, oh my God, I'm a huge fan of your work and all this. And I said, I read Kiss the Girls when I was 12 and, you know, it absolutely blew my mind. And he said, wow, that's really inappropriate. What was your mum doing when you were reading Kiss the Girls when you were 12 years old? And I said, you know, it's a long story. But we got on so well at that party that my publisher she was giving him a pack of books of crime writers from Penguin Random House to take home, and she put my book in that pack just to say, you know, you've met her already type of thing. And he read it on the plane home to Florida and called up and said, would she be interested in writing with me? And I have a lovely relationship with him. We are working on our 7th book now, I believe. And he's lovely. He's like an uncle or something. You know, he answers the phone and he says something like, you again, you know, and we have really good chats. Last time I spoke to him, we spoke for about an hour, and I think we discussed the novel that we're writing together at the moment for about 5 minutes of that time. So yeah, it's great, really great.
That sounds great. It sounds like real collaboration, whereas Robert Ludlum and those sorts of sharecropping type arrangements where writers write under the real writer's name kind of thing. It's a bit different. But yeah, that's you're lucky there.
Yeah, I am lucky. I don't know how he works with all of his collaborators, but people get quite skeptical about it. And I'll do a library talk and someone will come and say, you know, very sternly, they'll say, you know, you just write the books and he just stamps his name on it and all this. I know your secret. And I say to them, it would be so much easier if it was that way. But it's not, because we have to exchange what we're working on every 2 weeks, and we talk for hours, and his standards are really, really high, and he he's constantly saying, you can do better than this, and more research, and I can't get away with anything. He'll say, 3 books ago we had a character with pink hair, so you can't have another character with pink hair. And I go, Jesus, how do you even remember anything like that? I don't know how he does it. So yeah, no, it's loads of fun writing with him. He's great.
Thank you. Great.
Are there any further questions?
Yes, I've got one.
Thank you.
How do you go about plotting your books? I come up with lots of ideas, but I got an ending. It's the middle bit that's the problem.
Yeah. I get this question a lot. I'm very good friends with Lee Child. He is another lovely, lovely man, and he sort of says, very simplistically, Lee is one of these people who will, put the entire idea into one very simple sentence. And he says, a book is just a question posed on page 1 that you don't answer until page 456. And it just has to be a question that is intriguing enough that you will work on it for 90,000 words. And that, I have a crisis at 30,000 words, and that's, it's like you could set your watch to it. And that's because I've posed the question at the start of the novel, and I don't know if it's a good enough question to last me the rest of the time, and I don't know if it's worth answering, and I sometimes don't even know the answer. And I lie on a couch and I wail and cry, and I talk to my agent and my husband and my publisher and all this kind of stuff. So if you're thinking this is a struggle that only aspiring authors have, then you're wrong. We all have it. And I just always say to myself, what am I trying to say? What am I trying to say with this book? With Crimson Lake, I was trying to say that a single accusation can destroy your entire life. And sometimes having your entire life destroyed is a little bit exciting. And so those are the two kind of elements that I was putting together there. So sometimes I think people are wedded to a character that they've come up with, or they're wedded to a scene, or they're wedded to a setting. But what is your overall question? I think that might help.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Is there anybody else? All right. Thank you very much, Candice. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. You missed the beginning, and Bill mentioned that this was our first meeting in a year. So we opened with 2 excellent papers. Thank you to Erin with her excellent paper, and thank you to Candice with her really informative talk. Yes, Bill's still there. Would you like to say anything to close us off, Bill?
Yeah, could we throw it open to a formal chat for everybody now? Everybody got past our ladder to each other, and I'd like to say a big thank you to Candice, of course. That was great discussion, and good to hear that Sherlock Holmes has got so much influence on you.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks also to Erin for a fantastic presentation. Thank you to Doug Elliott, who's doing the recording. And I should mention that when Doug has done the recording and has done the editing, we'll be posting this video up on YouTube and letting all our members know it's there to watch. So anybody who couldn't join us today can log into YouTube and see what happened. Thank you to all our attendees, of course. Your participation was very important. This is our first ever virtual meeting, and it's gone pretty well so far. So thank you for your participation and your interest. Hope you enjoyed the experience. Obviously, we'd all like to get your impressions of how the meeting went. Did you enjoy it? How could it be improved to make it better for you? You can let us know by sending me emails or posting questions to our Facebook group, or let us know now if you like. But look forward to your thoughts on how this first virtual meeting went, because we're probably going to do some more this year until everybody's got the vaccine and we can all meet together in person again. So we're looking forward to that very much. But thank you very much for attending today. It's been great.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
David, anything else you want to add or say something?
No, I I came prepared to listen to Erin and Candice, and I haven't prepared anything else. No, sorry. Sorry about that.
Well,
Yeah, actually,
I'm here. Thank you so much, guys. I'm going to have to probably sneak away though. Out my office window, I can see my little bit of Violet. It's getting to that time of the afternoon where she's getting a bit difficult. But thank you so much, and I'll call me up for anything else that you guys need, and yeah, see you around.
Okay, I think we will later on.
Thank you.
Bye.
Well, if no one's got anything to say to us, thank you all for attending. I think it's gone pretty well for our first virtual meeting. We'll probably be doing this again, so we'll keep in touch and let you know what's going on. But thanks very much for your attendance. It's been great. Great to see you all.
I would like to thank again Yuichi and Alex from Japan and Czech Republic. That was a marvelous effort, and I hope you both enjoyed it at the wrong time.
I was so enjoyed your splendid meeting from Tokyo. I do hope to join your actual meeting in some future. And I'm also happy to see Alice after so many years. This thing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great that you could join us.
Thank you, David.
Nice to meet you.
It's a little bit hard for me so early in the night, but I'm glad to meet you here after many years. I met with Bill in Prague or with Yuichi once in Washington, D.C. And I hope I will be able to join you more often.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Alice. You can go back to bed now.
And everyone, I'm preparing the next issue of the log right now. So if anybody's got anything they want to contribute, please send it through. It'd be very welcome.
Right. We'll also be sending out shortly the annual voting form for our Montpelier Award for the best bit of research that was published in the Passenger's Log for the last 12 months. So we're very interested if you could have a vote on that. Gabriella, that's all new to you. You're only a new member, so you don't know what's that, but we have an award every year for the best research article published in the Passenger's Log, our journal. So everyone gets to vote on which one they think's the best. You haven't seen any of those previous articles, so next year you'll be able to join us in the voting, but not this year maybe. All right, David, we might call it quits, and thank you everybody again for joining us and making it such a wonderful occasion.
Thanks, Phil, and thanks from me too.
Bye now.
Nice seeing everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you all.